Hello everyone and welcome to another Danganronpa video. Now this is going to start pretty interestingly as chapters 1 and 2 are already done. That's because we're going to take a look at a motive that really is only explored in fanfiction. Transfer student from the grave. This is chapter 3's motive where Monokuma gives the students the Necronomicon and tells him that they can use it to bring back a previously dead student as a transfer student. Basically, this was their attempt at instituting a rejoin. However, in canon, this never happened. When you think about it, Korekiyo essentially robbed us of having the chance of Danganronpa's first official rejoin, because Angie was going to use the Necronomicon, but Korekiyo had killed her before she got the chance, and therefore no student was brought back. And in this timeline, we're going to explore what if the Necronomicon was real? What if the Necronomicon motive isn't just a motive for somebody to kill? Or, more accurately, this video should be titled, What if Angie had survived Korekiyo long enough to make it to her lab with the Necronomicon in hand? And therefore, one of the previously 4 dead students have been brought back. Here's one scenario. Before we get to it, we have to get some background. In this alternate timeline, the motive is still given out. The Necronomicon is still given to the students, and Monokuma still tells them that one student could be brought back from the grave if they could use the Necronomicon on them. And so, Angie takes it on herself to revive one of the students. She assembles the student council with Angie, Gonta, Himiko, Kibo, Tsumugi, and eventually Tenko. And in this timeline, Angie manages to survive Korekiyo for long enough that she makes it to her lab with her candle and the Necronomicon in hand. While on the way, she is approached by Shuichi alongside Kaito and Maki, who asks her if they could bring Kaede back to life. The student council has agreed on Rantaro. And so Angie tells Shuichi that she might think about it. Since both Kaede and Rantaro are fan favorite characters, I figured I'd split this video into 2 alternate timelines. The first is what if Kaede was brought back, and the other if Rantaro was brought back. So let's get started with the Kaede timeline. Now, this is going to start very similarly to the fanfic Bring Me to Life, which I will link in the description for you guys to read. So let's get started. In this alternate timeline, Angie is stopped by Shuichi, Kaito, and Maki. Kaito tells Angie that Shuichi has something to ask her, and Shuichi goes and asks Angie if she could bring back Kaede instead of Rantaro. And Angie says that she'll think about it. And in this timeline, she listens to Shuichi. She starts up the ritual and burns the Necronomicon into ashes with her candle. And unlike in the fanfic where she trips, in this timeline she deliberately dumps the ashes onto Kaede's effigy. Kaede Akamatsu is brought back as the first student to officially rejoin the competition. Alright, so with that out of the way, we can now get to the rest of the timeline. So, as we know, Kaede now has a target on her back, because everyone thought she has murdered before, and therefore she might do it again. And with that, Gonta is stabbed via a trap. He's basically impaled, much like the bug did in his execution, and he dies. Now, the other students perform the seance and decide to talk to Gonta, and unfortunately, the seance can't get underway because Angie is also found dead. Now, what happens is, who is the killer now that both Gonta and Angie are dead? When Kaede walks out of the room, she falls into a hole and gets hit in the head with a board, where she finds that a plank has been sawed out of the floor, and therefore this leads her to indicate the murder. Korekiyo Shinguji. Now, Kaede does mention that she never met his sister, and so with that, Korekiyo is executed. Chapter 4. Now, Chapter 4 goes pretty much the same. The motive is that Kokichi swipes the key card off of Monofeni and uses it to attempt the death row to despair again and goes into the outside world. And so, Kokichi enters the virtual world alongside everybody else, except for Kaede and Maki. Unfortunately for Kokichi, he is found dead. When everyone leaves the virtual world, Kokichi is dead. Now, without Kokichi, nobody is outed. And so, who is the murderer if Kokichi is dead? Because Kokichi had manipulated Gonta and outed him, but with Gonta dead a chapter earlier and Kokichi dead now, there's no way for anyone to tell. And so, with that in mind, who is the murderer? Well, Kaede and Shuichi pin it down to one person, Miu Iruma. Yeah, the person who created the virtual world is in fact the murderer. Because Miu and Kokichi really hate each other. And therefore, with that, Miu is executed, and we now have 8 students going into Chapter 5. It's pretty obvious that Kaito will die here. He is sick and has a weak immune system. And so, therefore, without Kokichi there, though, Kaito would not be the culprit. He would instead be the victim. Now, with that in mind, I think that Maki would go and grab the antidote for Kaito and would give it to Himiko instead. Or maybe she should just take it herself. But no matter what happens, Kaito still dies, and therefore that means either Himiko or Maki would be the one to sacrifice themselves. And in this timeline, it's going to be Maki. Yeah, unfortunately, this does mean 2/3 of the trading trio is already gone, but this does mean that Maki has finished her character development and would fully embrace her feelings for Kaito. And basically, yeah, Maki is executed, where we move on to Chapter 6 and the final 6. And so, with that, these 6 are the only ones left. With Shuichi's help, Kaede is able to clear her name. And so, basically, Tsumugi is on the outs. And so, Shuichi is able to out Tsumugi as the mastermind, and she is executed. Kaede, now seeing that Tsumugi was the one who killed Rantaro and she was framed, she has a more violent reaction to Tsumugi than Shuichi did. So with that, Tsumugi is executed, and Kibo still blows himself up to save his friends, leaving the 4 survivors in the Kaede timeline to be Himiko, Kaede, Shuichi, and Tenko. How interesting, 2 duos survive in this timeline. Switching things round now to the other timeline, what if Rantaro was instead the one brought back? The start of the timeline begins the same way. Angie evades Korekiyo long enough to retrieve her candle. She heads back to her lab. She is approached by the trading trio and is asked to bring Kaede back. While in the Kaede timeline, Angie listened to the trio. In this timeline, she listens to the student council and goes with the original plan. And so with that, Rantaro Amami is the one who rejoins. Now, unlike in the Kaede timeline, where the trading trio might have a respect for the student council, in this timeline, Rantaro's return would probably deepen their factioning, because Shuichi would probably despair over the fact that Angie could have had a chance to bring Kaede back, and she blew it, all because of her little cult. Rantaro would have to be the one to bring the factions together. Now, the 2 that died in canon were Angie and Tenko in that order. In this timeline, that's not necessarily going to happen, at least not in that order. Tenko would be the one to die first, because Angie evaded Korekiyo. And so, they now have to figure out who killed Tenko. And Tenko's death would be the one who starts Himiko's character development, because, don't forget, both of them dying basically kickstarted Himiko's character development because she was crying at the end of Chapter 3. During the seance, Shuichi basically asks Angie if they could at least have a seance to talk to Kaede. But before they could, Angie is dead. During the class trial, Shuichi pins it on Korekiyo and therefore he is executed. Man, he is basically doomed not to survive past chapter 3. Sorry to all of you Korekiyo fans. But yeah, if you are a Rantaro, Kaede, Ryoma, or Kirumi fan, blame Korekiyo for essentially robbing us of a potential rejoin. Now, Chapter 4 would probably go the same way. Kokichi swipes the key card, everyone goes into the virtual world, Mew is killed, and Kokichi outs Gonta, and he is executed for it. Chapter 5 goes pretty much the same way. Maki shoots Kokichi, and then she grabs the antidote, but Kokichi gives it to Kaito, meaning he dies, and then Kaito is executed. Now, Chapter 6 is where things really start to get interesting. Rantaro and Shuichi find evidence that Kaede wasn't the one who killed him, especially with Rantaro, as he reveals that the shot put ball that he thought killed him actually fell straight just to his left and therefore missed him. With this new information, Shuichi and Rantaro go up to Monokuma and challenge him to a retrial, leading us to the start of Chapter 6's events. Now, in this timeline, with Rantaro still alive, Rantaro decides to make a bet with Monokuma. If they could find his real killer within a certain amount of time, say 5 minutes, then Kaede would be brought back and his real killer will be executed in the same way she did. If not, then Rantaro will die alongside his real killer. Basically, he said something along the lines of, "Oh yeah? I'll get Kaede back, or I'll die trying." And so, with that in mind, all the students work together to figure out who the real culprit is. And eventually, they do. With 5 seconds left on the clock, Rantaro and Shuichi find out that Tsumugi was the one who actually killed Rantaro, not Kaede. Tsumugi is in utter shock that Rantaro managed to figure her out. And so, when Monokuma is asked to hold up his end of the bargain, Monokuma says no, trying to cause more despair, but Rantaro says, "Shuichi, go get it." And so, Shuichi finds out that there's actually another copy in the Mastermind's room. Tsumugi screams for him to come back, but Rantaro stands up to Tsumugi and says, "No, face it, you lost." And so Rantaro and Tsumugi have an argument in the middle of the trial room. During the argument, Shuichi finds the second copy, heads into Angie's room, Kaede is brought back, and so when Shuichi returns, Kaede is there with him, and Tsumugi is also in shock. Kaede thanks Shuichi for bringing her back, but Shuichi tells her that it was actually Rantaro's idea. And so Kaede thanks him. And so Tsumugi is executed. Kibo decides to blow up the academy as well, sacrificing himself to save his friends. There are actually 5 survivors in the Rantaro timeline, being Himiko, Kaede, Maki, Rantaro, and Shuichi. Yeah, I know that was kind of a cheap shot because Kaede got revived both times, but hey, I'm a Kaede fan. What else are you gonna do? Anyway, that does it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and turn on post notifications. That way you can be the first to watch all of my latest content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.